Okay, so I do have some tutorial notes up on my blog, dave.if90.net, under KIB216 tutorials and week 3. As you can see, I've put the slides and the screencast up for the lecture from Monday, including the extra slides that we didn't really get to go through in detail that essentially cover what I'm going to demonstrate today. So there's a video here which goes into setting up a WordPress site via Cpanel, which is essentially what I'm going to demonstrate anyway. But that's also there if you just want that individual little tutorial. And the rest of this sort of relates to the theming stuff, depending on how much we get to that. Okay, so let's start by looking at a classic web hosting setup. So I've set up a new domain, created a new site on the same web hosting service that I'm hosting my blog on. And so at the moment nothing's set up, so when I go to the URL it just shows nothing. The first thing I'm going to want to do is look for my administration interface for my web hosting. Now this is something that you should get in your setup email, telling you that this is the address that you need to go to for your web hosting. In my case it's this and then /cpanel. Okay, so Cpanel is a very common web hosting administration interface. I'm sure a lot of you will get this as part of your hosting. And the address to it may be an IP address or it may be part of your domain. But the important thing is that you will get this address to your Cpanel or equivalent web interface in the setup email. If you don't get that in the setup email, then I'd suggest emailing your hosting and requesting the address for your Cpanel or whatever the equivalent is for their hosting. So you'll also get, as part of the setup email, a username and password to log into that. I can't give you this password, but you can just watch and see what it looks like. And so when you log in, you'll see an interface that looks something like this, and whether you have Cpanel or something else, it's going to look similar. There's going to be a bunch of options, different areas for administering different things to do with your web hosting. So the first thing to note is these things usually have pretty good documentation. So you have things like Getting Started Wizard, and then this one they also have a bunch of video tutorials which cover some of the common things that you'll want to do inside of Cpanel. And you'll notice there's a lot of options and they can look kind of overwhelming, but you won't have to touch most of these ever to handle most cases. So I'm going to show you the ones that you'll need to configure so that you can set up a WordPress site. Now the first thing I want to be able to do is access the files on my web server. And there's a few ways of doing that. Often you'll get a web-based file manager, like here. If I look down under Files, click on File Manager, and go. Okay, it opens up looks like an Explorer window or a Finder window, and shows me what files and folders are on my web server. So you notice there's generally a bunch of folders already set up. And there's almost certainly going to be one called public_HTML. So this is the one where I want to add my website files. So when I install WordPress, this is where it's going to install to. So you can use this to upload files if you want. There's Okay, there's an upload button there, and you can choose files and you can select them and upload them through the web interface. So that's okay if you just want to upload 1 or 2 files and do a little bit of stuff, but it's probably going to be a bit too tedious when it comes to doing when it comes to working on a full website. So while that's there, generally I don't use that at all. The preferable way to interact with the files on your web server is through FTP, File Transfer Protocol. So you can see down here under Files there's also a link to FTP Accounts. Okay, now you probably already have an FTP account set up for you as part of the, again, as part of the setup email that you get. You'll get a host name and a username and a password for your FTP account. In that case, you don't have to go through this, but in my case, I don't have any accounts set up already, and if you ever want to create more accounts for other users, then this is where you can do it. So, as I said, an FTP account needs essentially 3 pieces of information: the location of the server, a username, and a password. So I'm going to create a new user here, so I'll create as my login, and it's by default going to append the domain name of the website to the end of the username. So when I log in, my login's going to be dave@KIB216.if90.net, and then I need to create a password. Cpanel has a password generator which generates very secure passwords for you, so you can use that if you want. Upside to that is security, but the obvious downside is that that's not particularly easy to remember off the top of your head. So I generally use my own, but as long as it's something fairly secure, then you should be okay. Okay, so this here tells you how strong it thinks your password is. Put that in again, and the other thing that you can do is set up what the default. Yes, question. You could share accounts, or you could set up completely different accounts if you want. So what you can do is give a particular FTP account access to a certain folder. So if you only want a certain user to have access to, let's say, your uploads folder, but not any of the other WordPress files, you could set up different accounts like that here. Yeah. So this home directory thing here tells it which directory to open up in, and I'm going to tell it by default to just open up in the top level directory, and it tells me here that I can't leave this blank, but the way that you can indicate the top level directory is just by using a single full stop. Okay, and then you can do other things like limiting the amount of transfer that a particular FTP account gets to use and so forth, but I'm just going to leave that to unlimited. Okay, and then I'm going to create a FTP account. It tells me that my account's created, and I can see now that it's listed down here. So I can come back here and delete the account. If I forget my password, I can change it here. Okay, so this screen is essentially where you manage all of your FTP accounts. Okay, so now I need to remember this is my login and the password that I set up there, and then that's all the information that I need to connect to my web hosting with an FTP client. So what I'm going to do next, to save a little bit of time, is actually download the WordPress installation files. So I find them at the website wordpress.org, okay, as opposed to wordpress.com, which is for hosting external WordPress websites. Okay, and there's a download link on the front page. It's fairly obvious. I'm just going to click download WordPress. and it will download a zip file for me. Okay, that downloaded nice and quickly. Okay, so what I'm going to need to do is extract the zip file. Okay, and it will extract to a folder called WordPress for me, and inside of here is all of the files which make WordPress run. So you can notice that all of these files are PHP files, so WordPress itself runs on PHP. So what I need to do now is get these files onto my web server. So to do that, I'm going to need to connect with an FTP client. Now, I mentioned one of those FTP clients last week, which is the one that I've been using called Filezilla. I'm not sure what FTP clients they have on these computers here, but I'll just check quickly. Okay, the Macs here have a program called Cyberduck, which if you don't want to download and install a separate one, you can use that. I'm just opening it up to see what it looks like. So any FTP client that you use is going to look similar. You're going to have a place where you log into an account, and then you're going to have a place where it lists all the files and folders, and then it's pretty much as simple as dragging and dropping folders from your computer to the FTP client, or vice versa, to download and upload files. So this is the one I use anyway, Filezilla. It's free and it's cross-platform, so it works on Mac and Windows and Linux. And as you can see up here in the quick connection section, I have hostname, the username, and password. So that's going to be the ones for the FTP account that I just set up, or it's going to be the ones for the FTP account that's already set up for you that you get in your setup email. Now this is a quick connection thing that I can connect quickly to, but most FTP client programs will also have sort of a site manager or bookmarks, because you're probably going to come back and connect to your web hosting several times, so you may as well set it up once so that you don't have to keep coming back and entering in all the details. So I've set up a site here, and I've given it a name. I've just given it the same name as the domain name of my site, and then I've entered in the details that relate to what I just set up. So my host is generally, that's going to be the same as your domain name, unless you're given something else specific in your setup email. And then my username that I created there, and the password that I created in my cPanel. Okay, and that's pretty much all you need to set up. The one other thing I will talk about is sometimes you'll see it gives you the option of transfer mode, choosing between default active or passive. Generally, it's advisable to try passive first, because what a passive connection does is it will connect, it will do its stuff, and then when it's finished it will disconnect. So that if you have multiple people trying to connect to your FTP server, that it's not tying up the connection, because there are limits to how many people can connect at once. Now in certain cases it doesn't work very well, and I know in the case of my server that passive connection doesn't work very well. It fails to connect sometimes. So an active connection is one where you connect once and it stays connected until you disconnect, essentially. But mostly the default setting will work. So I would say go with the default first, and then if it doesn't work, try one of these other two. Okay, so that's all set up for me. Again, I can specify a default directory to connect to, but I'll just leave that blank. so that it uses the server default. And I'll hit connect. Okay, and you can see it goes through a bunch of commands, but what it does that I'm interested in is it brings up the directory listing of what's in my web hosting. Okay, so this has got two windows for which show me different files. This one is the files on my local computer. This one is the files on my remote web hosting. So I can drag and drop between these, but most clients will also let you drag and drop from a Finder window as well. Okay, so there's a bunch of things already set up. You can see for example, there's a folder here, PHP. Okay, so that actually contains the PHP application, and there's a bunch of other stuff that make your web server work. But the folder that we'll be dealing with pretty much exclusively in terms of uploading files to is going to be the public HTML folder. So the public HTML folder is the one that it's going to look for files in when you type in your domain. So at the moment I have nothing in here except for this HT access file, and we can ignore that for the moment. So when I go to my website, okay, it's obviously not loading anything up. But as soon as I start putting some HTML or PHP files in there, we should see them load up. So you may or may not have files and folders in your public HTML directory already. If you do, then I would say just leave them there and put your other files in there along with them. Okay, so now that I've got that, I'm going to upload the contents of my WordPress directory to my public HTML folder. So here they are on my computer, and I'm going to drag them across. Okay, and you'll see that there's a bunch of stuff going on, and my WordPress files start to get added to my public HTML directory. Okay, now while that's going on, I'm going to jump back to my Cpanel, and I'm going to go back home. So the other thing that we need to set up for WordPress to work is a MySQL database, and we can do that from Cpanel as well. If we go down a little bit, okay, we can see that here under databases, we've got a few different options. You have sort of like an automated setup wizard, which you can use if you want, but I'm just going to click on this first one, which says MySQL databases. Okay, and this lets me create databases and also create user accounts to access the databases. So probably you won't have any databases set up by default. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a new database. And again, the database names, just by convention of this web hosting, are going to be prefixed with sort of the name of my web hosting. So I'm going to call this is the database that I'm going to use for my WordPress site. So I might think I could call this something like WordPress. And I could, but at the same time, you've got to think you may want to install multiple different websites on your server, and a whole bunch of them might use WordPress as their foundation. So it's probably will start to not make sense when you have to have WordPress 1, WordPress 2, WordPress 3. So probably a better idea is to name the database in relation to what your website's for. So if this is going to be my portfolio website, then I'll call this database portfolio. Okay, and then I'll click create database. All right, and it tells me that it's added the database KIB216L_portfolio. So that's going to be the database name that WordPress is going to connect to. So I'll remember that bit of information. Okay, and once we've done that, we also need to create a user account to access the database. Okay, so we have different user accounts for accessing different things. We don't just have one account which lets us access FTP and our databases and all this other stuff. Okay, so this account that I'm creating now is specifically for access to the database. So I need to create a username for this, and again, you can have multiple accounts, multiple database accounts if you want. I'm going to call this one, this will be my database account, so I'm going to call it Dave. And the password, again, you can use the password generator or you can type in your own one. Okay, so the requirement for this one is that you have to have a password strength of 80, so it has to be, it's probably going to need to be fairly long and have numbers and letters. Yep. Yeah, you can install it on a subdomain, but you'll still need to set up a database for WordPress to connect to. Okay, so you've got a hosting thing which lets you essentially go install WordPress. Yeah, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's absolutely fine. The thing with that is your login or your account for accessing the database is probably going to be the same details as the one that you used to log into Fantastico. So when it comes to setting up WordPress, then they're probably the details you need. I don't know if have you already. Okay, right. Okay, so it's all fine. Yeah. So you may have hosting that has sort of a one-click installation of WordPress, and that's fine. I'm happy for you to use that if you've got that. But I'm showing you this process because you're bound to come across hosting at some point where you have to set it up manually. Okay, so I'll enter my password again. And then hit create user. Right, and it tells me it's created user KIB216L_Dave. Alright, with this password. So that's the password that I'm going to have to enter into WordPress's configuration so that it can connect to my database. Yeah. The user role, well, I'll be doing that. I'll be demonstrating that now. So this might answer your question. So there's one more thing that we have to do with the database. We have to assign a database user account access to a particular database that we've created. Okay, so down here you can see it says add user to database. So I'm going to select my user and my database, and then I'm going to click add. Okay, and then you'll get a screen which asks what privileges you want to allow this particular database user account to do on the database. Okay, so these are kind of like file permissions, but they're database permissions. So you can have restrictive permissions for some accounts. Maybe you just want to let people be able to view the database but not modify it. In the case of the account for WordPress to access, then we actually need to give it all privileges, because WordPress is going to need to create tables, edit tables, view them, read them, modify them. It's going to need to do pretty much everything. So I'm going to click on the all privileges, and all these checkboxes get ticked, and then I'm going to hit make changes. Okay, and it tells me that user was added to the database like that. Okay, and now you should be able to see them listed. So there's the database there, and there's the database users. And as you add more, they'll show up there as well. And again, you can delete the databases from here, and you can also delete the database users. Okay, so that information that I've just created, I'm going to need to give WordPress so that it knows how to connect to the database on my hosting that it's going to use. Okay, we'll see how this is going. Alright, that looks like it's entirely uploaded. So what I can do now is refresh my domain name of my website, And now that I have files in there, I should see something happen. Okay, so this is likely the first thing that you're going to see. And this is WordPress telling you that that you need to set up the configuration so that it knows how to access your database. So it gives you the option to create this configuration file through a series of its own interfaces, and it tells you that it needs to know this information about your database. You go, okay, yep, let's go. So this here is where we enter the name of the database that we created. Okay, so I'm just going to refer back to my Cpanel to make sure that I get this exactly right. Okay, there's my database name. I'm just going to copy and paste that. My database username is that one. And my database password was one there. So obviously just note that the password that you create for the database, okay, you're going to have to enter in plain text. It's not going to be obscured. So my advice is don't use the same password that you use for your email or your bank account here. I mean, people won't be able to see it once it's set up, but if anyone's looking at your screen while you're setting up, they will be able to see it. Okay, now the database host. Generally, you leave this as localhost unless in your setup email they give you a different server address. So most of the time, the database application is going to be run on the same server as your web hosting is, in which case localhost just refers to this same computer. Sometimes they'll have a separate server for storing the databases, in which case they'll give you a URL or an IP address to that server. But almost always, you'll just leave this as localhost. And the table prefix here is just to say when we create tables in the database, we can give them a prefix. That doesn't really matter. I suggest you just leave that as the default. Okay, so all that information's entered correctly. I'm hitting submit. Okay, and if your configuration file is, or if your folder is writable by WordPress, then it can create that file for you. Most of the time, by default, it won't be. So you'll get this screen saying, sorry, I couldn't create it automatically, but I've put all the code here that you need to copy and paste into it. So what you'll see here is this is essentially the configuration file, what it looks like, and there's parts of the file which define various different things for WordPress, okay, and they're the database name, username, password, and host for the database. Okay, so that's stored in a configuration file for WordPress so that every time you load it up, it reads that information out and it can then connect to the database. So if you ever change your database that you want to use WordPress with, you can come back and edit this configuration file to enter the new information. So I'm going to copy all of that, and it's telling me that I need to put it in a file called wp-config.php. So if I look back in my FTP client, okay, I can see there is a file called wp-config-sample.php. So if we wanted to, we didn't actually have to go through those interfaces. We could have just opened this up and edited it manually. So it doesn't really matter which way you do this, but the point is it's looking for a file called wp-config. So you either need to copy this file and rename it, or you can just rename this one itself and we'll override it. So it should be called wp-config.php. Okay, now what I'm going to do now is edit this file. Now depending on your FTP client, you may have to download that to your computer, open it up, edit it, save it, and then re-upload it. Filezilla has a nice feature where you can just right click and go view edit. Okay, and it will download and open it up in the editor of your choice. You can configure that editor in the preferences of Filezilla. In my case, it's opening up in the ID which I'm using called PHP Storm. Or it should do. Let's try that again maybe. Okay, there it is. So this is the WP config file. Alright, and as you can see, the sample file they give you is essentially the config file without the information entered in here. So we could just come in here and enter the database name and username in there if we want, but I'm just going to copy and paste the configuration file code that it gave me through those WordPress interfaces. Okay, so you can see there it is filled out there, all my database information. Okay, and I'm going to save this file and okay, so Filezilla will automatically realize that I've modified that file and ask me if I want to re-upload it again, and I'll say yes please. Okay, so now that new version of the config file should be on my server. Now I'm going to go back to my WordPress or my website, and I go, okay, I've copied and pasted that into the WP config file and saved it onto the server, and now I'll click this run install and WordPress will go through some things to set up all of your database tables essentially. So before I do that, I might just jump back to Cpanel to show you what this is doing. So I did briefly mention this in the lecture. Another interface that you'll often get to administer your databases is Phpmyadmin, and this is one where you can actually log in and view what the database looks at. So if I click on this, okay, if I hadn't logged in before, I would log in here with the database user account that I created. Okay, and so as you can see, here is the database that I created here for my WordPress, and as you can see, it's empty at the moment. So the good thing about WordPress is we don't have to set up the database manually ourselves. As soon as I click this run install, it's going to do some PHP stuff to create all of the tables in the database that it needs. So you don't necessarily have to worry about coming in and doing anything with Phpmyadmin. I'm just showing you this to show you that it's empty now. And when I hit this run install after I've set up my configuration, okay, WordPress will do its thing behind the scenes. And now if I were to refresh this, I actually have to go back into it. Okay, I might not actually do it until the next step. It's okay, so yes, okay, sorry, there's one more step to go through first. So it does some setup stuff, and then it gives us this interface where we enter things like the site title. So I'll call this a site, and all this information we can change later. Okay, and we have to create one more account now. So there's quite a few accounts that you have to keep track of. This account that we're creating now is the account for you to log in and administer your WordPress site from the WordPress backend. Okay, all those other accounts you probably won't need to use as much anymore, but this is one that you should probably remember. The default username is admin, but I like to change that to my own name. So you can create multiple accounts for different people to access your WordPress site. So as we talked about in the lecture, you could have some people whose task it is to administer the website, so install things, install themes. You could have other accounts where their job is to write articles and post articles. Okay, so I'm going to create, but we have to create one account first of all to log in. And this is usually the administrator account. So you give yourself a username and then give yourself a password. And if you want, you can put in an email address. And the email address is used for things like if people post comments on your posts, then you can get sent an email, things like that. And then you can choose if you want to allow search engines to index this site or not. Can't really think of why you wouldn't want to let them, so I would suggest just leaving that ticked. And then I hit install WordPress. Okay, and it tells me WordPress has been successfully installed. Hopefully you can see that in, there we go. Okay, so now in Phpmyadmin you can see that's created a whole bunch of tables. So in a database, tables are essentially like spreadsheets. Okay, so if we look at that, they're just a bunch of columns with different information in them. So we have different tables in the database to store different things. Okay, so this particular table, WP Posts, will store any post that you create. There's one that stores comments, one that stores all the configuration options that you might put in. Okay, so we can see, for example, the blog name is what I just specified there, Dave's site. There's my email address that I entered. Okay, and any other configuration stuff that you do will be stored in here as well. So all of the data for your website gets stored in this database. But as I said, we don't have to mess around with this because WordPress has code interfaces that will do all that stuff for us. All we have to do is type out a post, hit submit, and WordPress will deal with the sending and retrieving to and from the database. Okay, so that's, now we have WordPress installed. So I can click on login now, and I'll log in with my username and password that I just created. And I usually click remember me so I don't have to keep coming back and logging in. Okay, and what you see here now is the administrator portion of the site. So you notice that the URL here has appended WP-admin. So if you ever need to get back to this section of the site, then all you have to do is type in your URL and then /WP-admin. Okay, and it will bring you back here. Now, I guess I could go through all of these different screens, but essentially they administer different things about the website, and you can read up on the documentation of what they all do, but I think what I'd rather do is just talk about them as we get to using them. Okay, but suffice to say, any administering of the WordPress thing, adding content, adding themes, adding plugins, that's all done through this admin interface here. So this is the back end. The front end is now just the URL of your website. Okay, so this is what a default WordPress installation looks like with the default theme, okay, and the default content. They give you one post and one page just so you can see what it looks like. So there's the post and there's the sample page. Okay, so normally you'll delete that sample content after you've added your own. Now, just a quick note, you'll notice that I've uploaded these WordPress files straight into my public HTML folder. Something that people often do is they'll extract the WordPress installation and then they'll drag that entire WordPress folder into their public HTML. And there's nothing wrong with that per se, except for the fact that for people to actually access your website, then they'll have to add /WordPress to the URL, which is, yeah.
If you do it that way, say you've got an existing website, can you then drag those files into
Yes.
every word file?
Yeah. There may be configuration stuff which has stored your path already. So what I would suggest is just reinstall WordPress, and then you can re-import the content. Yeah, but I'd go through just to be safe, I'd go through the installation process again. You could move them and go through the database and change stuff where you need to, but it's probably be easier just to go through the install process again. Yeah. Yep. The site URL. That's right. Yeah. So in the settings you can adjust where the home page of it is. Yeah. Although if you have other links throughout your website which have hard coded that /WordPress in there, it might be different. So yeah, it is possible either way, but in my opinion, you're probably better off just reinstalling it because it doesn't take that long. Yeah. Okay. All right. So front end, okay, and back end. All right. How are we going for time? It's pretty good. Okay. So we're pretty much done with Cpanel now. All that stuff's set up. We've got our FTP accounts, we've got our database account set up, and that's essentially it. The only other thing I'll mention about Cpanel is you can set up subdomains, so which is what I've done here. So if you want to set up something your website to direct to something else, then you can do that here. So you can specify a subdomain and then tell it to point to a different folder, and that's one way you can cheaply, without purchasing extra domain names, have different websites that point to different folders. Okay, so I think I'm done with Cpanel there. Done with WordPress there. Okay, let's see. Yep. Your public HTML folder you should be able to see when you log in via FTP. Have you tried doing that? Does it show up anything? Okay, I might just have to help you with that after, if that's okay. Yeah. Okay. All right, so we might jump straight into starting to look at how to create a WordPress theme. So sometimes I do a brief introduction of PHP, but I think a lot of people have already had some exposure to it. But the point is not, the point of this unit is not necessarily to learn PHP, because most of the PHP that you're going to use is going to be essentially copying and pasting from documentation. We're not going to be writing a lot of low-level PHP. It's mainly going to be identifying the function calls that we need to make for WordPress and understanding what that's going to output. Okay, so having said that, if you do want to do some background research on PHP, then W3 Schools is always a good resource, and php.net is the official website that contains documentation on all things PHP related. Okay, so we've done installing WordPress, creating a WordPress theme. Now I've posted a couple of links here. The first link is a start to finish tutorial on building a custom WordPress theme. It's a few years old now, so some of the things it talks about, there are, I guess, sort of other ways of doing it now. But nonetheless, if you want to look at that one later on, it's still good at explaining the process to go through. And then the other link here is one to WordPress's official documentation on theme development, which is probably a bit more technical and wordy, but I'm going to refer to it for some of the things that we need to do. So WordPress's documentation is stored at codex.wordpress.org, okay, and they have excellent documentation on pretty much anything you can think of. Okay, so it'd be worth having a look through some of that stuff, both generally and also when you're looking for something specific. And I'm going to be referring to this for the things that we need to use for our WordPress theme. Okay, now in terms of the process of creating a theme, you could start creating the theme in Scratch as part of the WordPress files, but an alternative way, and probably I think a simpler way, is to design up a typical page as a static HTML page first, and then sort of modify that to become a WordPress theme. So it's up to you which way you do it, but I'd say probably the easiest way forward is to do it that way, because you can sort out most of your CSS first, and your look and feel, and get all that sorted just using an HTML and CSS file before you have to worry about cutting things up and adding PHP. So in terms of the files for this, I'm going to use the example from last week's exercise. So I've got a link to the files for that here. Okay, so that's downloaded here. Extract that. Okay, so just so we remember what this looks like. Okay, I'm talking about this example here. Okay, so just some dummy content, but I've got my layout sorted out. So I've decided that I want a header, navigation, a left sidebar, a main content area, and a footer. Okay, and I've created the styles already so that stuff lays out. So the first thing I need to do is figure out where I need to put the theme files on my server. So what you'll notice is that in the WordPress files there's a folder called wp-content. Okay, and inside that there's two folders, one called plugins, obviously that's where the plugins will go when we start installing those, and there's one called themes. So by default, the most recent version of WordPress gives you two themes to choose from, their 2011 theme and their 2010 theme. And if we go back to the administration section and we look under appearance and themes, okay, you can see these two listed. So it tells me that 2011 here is my active theme, and then it will list other available themes here. So essentially, all you have to do to install a theme is add another folder to this themes directory with the files for your theme in it. Okay, so that's exactly what we're going to do. So I'll go back and find these files here. And what I'm going to do is create a new directory in the themes folder on my server. And I'll just call that test theme. Okay, so it's an empty directory, and I'm going to grab all of these files, okay, and upload those. Okay, so these are not in the right format to be a theme yet, but there's a folder now with stuff in it. So if I go back and refresh this page, okay, what you can see now is that it is recognizing that I've got something else in there, but the files aren't in the right format for it to recognize it as a theme. Okay, so we need to figure out what format these things actually need to be in. Okay, so as part of this link on theme development, it tells me a bunch of stuff. Okay, and okay, it tells me all of the different file names that it will look for different parts of the template. So just to go over a bit of terminology first, you'll hear me talk about template files and you'll hear me talk about themes. So a theme is the overall thing that you apply to it, and the template files are the individual parts of that theme that go together to make up the theme. Okay, so these here are all descriptions of template files, what you need to name them and what they would be used for. Now there's a lot of them here, and that might seem a bit daunting, but we scroll down a little bit and it talks about basic template here, and it says at the very minimum a WordPress theme consists of just two files, an index.php file and a style.css file. So we almost have those already. So you could create an entire theme that just has those two files. All of these other files here are optional. Okay, you only need to create these other files if you need other more specific parts of the template, and we'll get into those and what they can be useful for in probably the coming weeks. But for the moment, I'm going to start by just making sure I have an index.php file and a style.css file. Okay, so I'll go back here and I already have my style.css and I have index.html. Now, a PHP file is just an HTML file with bits of PHP in it. So all I need to do to make this recognized as a PHP file is essentially rename the file extension from .html to .php. Okay, now I'll go back to my admin section again. Alright, and refresh this again. Okay, and now you can see it's finding it as an available theme. So the only requirements for it to recognize as a theme is the index.php file and a style.css file. Now, it doesn't have any information related to this yet. You can see these other themes have, they have screenshots and they have descriptions and they have names and version numbers and so forth. Now, the only thing that this has is the name, and that's derived from the name of the folder. Now, the way that I can specify the information about this theme is through okay, so there's a section here called Theme Stylesheet. So the theme stylesheet being our style.css file, the way that WordPress draws information about the theme is by a comment section at the top of the file. So this here lists the comment section at the top of the default theme, and we can see that if we look at one of these default themes like 2011 and we open up its style.css, okay, you can see there is the comment section, and you can see where the particular bits of information that it's getting about that theme, okay, the name and the description are all entered in here. Okay, so there's a particular format. You essentially write sort of an attribute name with a colon and then the description of it. So you can add things like the theme name, a URL to the theme. If you want to ultimately let people download your theme, then you can give them a URL to link back to where it came from. You can specify an author, a website, a description, a version number, licenses, tags, okay, a whole bunch of stuff. Usually the only things that we need, and what I'm going to do is copy this and just modify it to suit what I need. Okay, I'm going to go back to my test theme and edit style.css. Okay, and I'm just going to paste that comment section at the top. And I'm just going to rename these things. So we'll call this Dave's test theme. Won't bother about putting a theme URL. The author, I'll put my name. Author URL, won't worry about that. Can put a brief description in. Put a version number in if I like, and I'm not going to worry about any of this other stuff. Okay, so usually those 4 things are sufficient to describe the theme, and then you can add other stuff if you want. I'm going to leave it at that for now. So again, Filezilla recognizes that I've edited the file, asks me to re-upload. I go yes. Okay, and now when I refresh this, okay, you can see that it now shows my name, or the name of the theme, the name of the author, and if I were to activate this, then up here it would, I think it would show me a description of it. Or even if I click on details, there we go, okay. There's the description, there's the version number. Okay, so that's where it's getting this information on the theme from the comment section at the top of the style.css file. Now in terms of the screenshot there, or the picture of the file, I do have somewhere here. I do have a screenshot file that I've uploaded. So in order to get this to show up, what you need to do is have a file called screenshot.png in the theme directory, and if it can find that, it will load that up, and that's a preview. Now, really, you kind of need to wait until the theme's finished for you to create a screenshot of it. So normally I would suggest just leaving that blank, and once you finally finish the theme, load up the website, take a screenshot, save it, and then upload it to the theme file, and then it will show up there. Okay, but I've just taken a screenshot of the static page as it looks, just to demonstrate that. Okay, so to set this as the active theme, what I need to do is click on Activate here. Okay, and now you can see up here it shows me that the theme is active, and if I go back here and refresh the page now, okay, you can see that something's changed, but clearly something's not quite right either. Okay, so I can see that the content is being output, but it's obviously not finding the link to my CSS file, and as well as not finding the link to my images. And the reason for that is, if we inspect this, and I might just open this up in Firefox so I can use Firebug. Okay, if I inspect this HTML here, okay, and I look in the head section, there's my link, which is looking for style.css. Okay, now we might think, well, I've got my style.css in the same directory as my theme, so why isn't that working? Well, the answer to that is because the way that relative files are specified is different if you've got an HTML file as per if you have a PHP file. If you're doing anything with PHP files and you're wanting to specify resources, then the way that you address those resources has to be relative to the web root, so essentially relative to your URL. And if that was the case, then if I need to specify this style.css file, then it's going to be something like KIB216.if90.net/WP content/themes/test theme/style.css. Okay, and I can't even navigate to that because WordPress's internal routing is just going to direct me back to the home page. But that's the address that I'd need to add in for that to work. Now, fortunately, WordPress has some easier ways of outputting the URL to the default style sheet. And the way that we do that is with, and for all of these functions that I'm going to be looking up, I'm going to be using WordPress's function index, function reference. Okay, so codex.wordpress.org/function reference will list you all of the different functions that you can call from WordPress to do various different things. Okay, and they're categorized by, I guess, the type of things that they do, and if you click on any one of these, then they're going to give you a rundown of what they do, and it'll give you an example of the code to put into how to do it. So this is what I mean by we don't necessarily need to know how to write too much PHP to do this, because these have all examples where we can just copy and paste them and then modify them to our needs. Now, one of the functions that we're going to use a lot is one called blog info. Okay, so, and maybe another easier way to find this might just be to Google as well. Okay, so alright, so this is the documentation on the particular WordPress function called blog info. And if I read the description, it says it displays information about your blog, and the information is dependent on what we tell it we want. So the way that we use it is we say blog info, and then in the brackets we ask it what info about the blog we want to retrieve. So if we look down a little bit further under parameters, okay, we can see that we can get things like the name of the blog, the description, the email, and then if we look down a little further, we can get the Stylesheet URL. Okay, and so you can see that that ends up outputting something similar to that long address to the style.css file within the theme. Okay, so let's do that right now. I'm going to view and edit my index.php file. Okay, and at the moment it's just got HTML in it. Okay, now where am I? Okay, so here's the line where I'm specifying the href to my CSS file, and all I'm going to do here is replace that with, okay, the first thing that I need to know is anywhere where I've got PHP, okay, it's going to be contained within opening PHP tag, which is less than sign question mark PHP, and then closing tag is question mark greater than sign. Okay, so anywhere where you're going to write PHP code, just like if you're writing JavaScript, you need to have it within script tags. PHP has opening and closing PHP tags so that the PHP application knows which parts it needs to interpret as HTML and which parts it needs to interpret as PHP. Okay, so go back and quickly have another look at this. Okay, so blog info is the function I need to call, blog info, and then in brackets I say I want the Stylesheet URL, and I'll put that in single quotes so that it doesn't mess with my HTML quotes. Okay, and then even though this is a single line of PHP, by convention we end every PHP statement with a semicolon, so that if I had multiple ones there, it would know which is the first statement and which is the second. Okay, so let's just see what that does now. Okay, so I'll save that and re-upload it. Okay, and what I want you to look at is how this part here changes. Okay, so this is the code that I changed. I replaced this with a PHP script. And what I want you to notice is that no PHP code itself gets output to the web page. What it does is the PHP gets processed as a program, and then the output from that PHP program gets inserted into the HTML in the place of that PHP. So what you're not going to see here is PHP blog info Stylesheet. What you're going to see here is the actual output of that function call, which is going to be the URL to our actual Stylesheet. Okay, so we'll refresh that. Okay, it's obviously worked because my CSS styles are being applied. Okay, and as you can see, there it is. The output from that function call has been to output that big long URL to my style sheet. So, and this is the process that we're going to use to output most of the information that we need from our WordPress. So the next thing that I want to do is output my site name. So I've hard-coded site name goes here, but really what I want to do is output the name that I've specified for my site in WordPress that's being stored in the database. Because what I want to be able to do is when my client is using my WordPress site, I don't want them to have to come in and modify the template file to change the site name. All I want them to have to do is go to the settings and change that name in the admin section of WordPress, and then for the template to automatically output that new site name. So if we go back and look at blog info again, we can see that that name, if we give blog info the parameter name, that it will output the name of our website. So we'll do that again. We'll look for the heading 1 section down here where my site name is. Okay, I'm going to remove that, and again I'm going to put inside of PHP tags blog info and name, and it with a semicolon. Okay, and alright, so what should change is instead of site name goes here being output, it should output whatever is stored as my site name in the database by WordPress. Okay, so let's refresh that. Sorry, forgot to re-upload. Okay, and there you can see it is. It's being cut off because my logo is not showing properly yet, but you can see it's changed to Dave's site, which is what I've stored in the WordPress settings. Now, if I were to go to my WordPress backend and I went down to, for example, settings and general, okay, where I can change the name of my site. And let's say I wanted to change it from Dave's site to Dave Wallace Portfolio. Save that. Okay, so I've saved that. That's been put in the database. And now when I reload the page, it's because I'm using a PHP function and behind the scenes of that PHP function, it's going to be going to the database, looking for the site name, extracting it from the database, and then printing it out. So when I refresh the page now, okay, you can see that it's updated. Okay, so this is what we mean when we're talking about the usefulness of having dynamic parts of our website. So by having that PHP code in there, we don't have to go and recode or mess around with the template code anytime we want to change something like that. All we have to do is go and change it in the WordPress backend, and it will automatically update. So next thing I want to fix is this logo here. So Oops. Okay, so this logo here, which is trying to find itself in images/logo. Okay, again, that's not working because the way this is written, it will be expecting to find images folder in the root directory, in my public HTML directory, and then logo.png inside of that. But in fact, where it does exist is in an images folder within my theme directory. So again, I'm going to use this blog info function, and this time I'm going to ask for I could ask for the template directory or the template URL. It probably doesn't matter as they return the exact same thing. But let's just say the request a template URL. So where's my logo? Yeah, there it is. Oh, so inside of the source here, I'm going to have PHP blog info template underscore URL. Okay, now template URL is only going to output as far as this directory here, test theme. Okay, so I still have, after test theme, I still need to specify that it's in a folder called images and then there's logo.png. So that's why I'm still leaving images/logo.png after that. So the combination of what this bit of PHP outputs and this part here is going to give me the full path to that particular image file. Okay, and I think I just need to add a extra / there. Okay, let's refresh that. Sorry, upload again. I think I know why this is. I forgot to undo disable images from last week on the web developer toolbar. Okay, so I should probably re-demonstrate that just so you know that I wasn't telling you lies. Load. Okay, alright, so this is before, okay, when it's just looking for images/logo.png, and this is after when we've output using blog info the template URL as well. Load. Okay, there it is. Okay, and there's the output. Oh, there's the source URL to my logo image. Another cool thing you can see with Firebug is that it will actually show you a little preview of that resource as well. Okay, so I'll do one more thing with blog info, and that is outputting the Okay, so I output the site name inside of this heading 1, but you'll notice that up here in the title attribute is still outputting HTML CSS skills test. Okay, so I also want to come up to the title here and just duplicate that blog info name, upload. Okay, and now it's outputting the site name both here and up here as well. Okay, so that covers one of the main two things that I wanted to cover today, which is how do you output information that WordPress has stored in the database. And as we've seen, that's generally through function calls, and one that contains a lot of those is blog info. But there are lots of others, and my suggestion would be if you want to find how to output something that you think that WordPress should probably output, then I would suggest that you Google it. So let's say for instance I didn't know about this blog info function, and I just wanted to find how to output the site title. Okay, then it's probably going to link you back to something like this. Okay, so obviously with hindsight I kind of know where to find these things, but as long as you know the sort of things that WordPress stores, then there's probably a way of outputting that information, and you should just be able to Google it and it will link you to the documentation regarding it. Okay, so alright, we might have enough time to do some simple cutting up of this into a proper theme. So we still don't have a particularly dynamic site, okay? We've got dynamic title and that's about it, but we've still got this static content left in here. But before I actually get on to outputting content stored within WordPress, what I want to do is cut up this single template file into multiple template files. So at the moment we just have index.php, but you may have, and very commonly in any website that you have, you'll probably know if you have 10 pages and you want to go and you have the same header, the same navigation on all of those, you want to go and make a change to the navigation or a change to the header, then you have to make that in all of those files. Now we can get around this using PHP and using WordPress themes by splitting up parts of the page and putting them in different files and then including them in whatever files that we want. So that probably the best example of that is to create a separate template file for the header of the page, and then we can include that header in any other pages that we want. So if I'll go back to this theme development page, and okay, and it talks about, so WordPress has a convention for naming things. So if we want to have a template part of a file which is for the header, then WordPress wants us to name it header.php. So I'm going to create that here. Okay, I need to create a what I'm going to do is create a new blank file. Can't do this in my other program, unfortunately. Well, maybe I can. Okay, great. So I'm going to create a new empty file called header.php, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to cut out from my index.php all of the stuff that I'm going to consider my header. Now, if I just take a quick look at the site, the consistent stuff that's going to be my header, I think for each page is going to be everything from this top bit, but also including the navigation. So to go on my header template file, I'm going to want all of the code down to essentially the end of the navigation part. So if I have a look down here, there's my navigation there. So I'm going to cut from the very top, including the doc type, down to the bottom of the navigation, and I'm going to paste this inside of header.php. Now I need to save this. Now I've created this blank file on my computer, so I haven't uploaded it to the Ftp account, or to my web server yet. So I'm going to need to save this somewhere else. So let's say I just save this on my I'll just save it on my desktop for now. Okay, there's header.php, and I will upload that to my theme directory. Okay, there it is, and now I can view and edit it from Filezilla. Okay, and I'll save my index.php file. And re-upload that. Okay, and now when I refresh, you can see that it looks like I've broken it entirely, but I sort of have, but I sort of haven't. So what this is doing now is loading the index.php file, but it no longer contains the head section of the document. So I actually have to say something within the index.php file to tell it to include that header file template. And the way that I do that, again, just referring back to the documentation, there is a function called... Okay, so this section here, just under basic template, talks about some of the common template files. And these are the ones that we're going to create, header and footer, and also sidebar. And it tells us here that these are the functions that we use to include any of those template part files within another file. So if I want to include that header.php file in my index file, then all I have to do is put a bit of PHP in there which says get header, like that. So that's exactly what I'll do. And it's going to output it wherever I put this PHP. So I don't want to put the PHP down the end of it, otherwise it's going to output my header at the bottom of the page. I want it to output at the top of the page, so get underscore header. Okay, and what that's going to do, okay, so this built-in WordPress function behind the scenes is going to go, okay, look for a file in the same template directory called header.php, and then essentially cut and paste the contents of that into here. So that will essentially rebuild that single page. But what it means is because we have header.php as a separate file, if I have another page, then I can also include it this way. And if I want to update header.php, I only have to do it in one place. Okay, so alright, upload that again. Okay, and there it is. Okay, so it looks the same, but what this means is if we had 10 other pages which also included the header, in order to go and change something in the header, all we have to do is modify one file rather than 10 files or 100 files. So let's just say in the header we want to let's just put something silly in there for just to see if it works. Re-upload. Okay, and so change to the header automatically gets included in the index file because it's imported that header file. So it'll become more obvious why that's useful when you start to have more files that also include the header and the footer and the sidebar, for example. Okay, I'll get rid of that. There, that. Fresh. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is separate out the sidebar. Because again, the sidebar is probably a component that we may want to use in multiple different templates, or maybe we don't want to use it at all. So again, I'm going to create a new file. Called sidebar.php. And again, I'll just save that on my desktop initially. And then upload that. In fact, I might do a couple of these just to save time. So I'm also going to have a footer.php as well. So we'll upload those. Okay, so sidebar.php is an empty file at the moment. What I'm going to do is grab everything pertaining to my sidebar, which is from there to there, and I'm going to cut that out of my index file, and I'm going to put it in my sidebar file here. Okay, and in the same way that I imported the header file, I'm going to import the sidebar file. So just before I do that, again, I'll upload these files, and we can see that, okay, without importing it, okay, the index.php file just looks like this. Okay, it just doesn't have the sidebar code. But if I go back to my index file, and in the same place where I cut my sidebar code from, I put php get underscore sidebar. Okay, I can refresh, and there it appears again. Okay, and likewise, I can then go and modify the sidebar file, and any other template file which includes it will automatically get the updates. Okay, there it is. Alright, and just very quickly, I'm going to do the same thing again with the footer. So let's open up the footer.php file, which is currently blank. And see you later, you're right. Okay, and I'll cut my footer code from the index file and put it in the footer.php file. Re-upload both of those. Okay, and then in where my footer was, again php, and in this case get underscore footer. Okay, and there's my footer. So now this is still the one logical page, but it's being put together from templates which represent subsections of that page. And any of those little subsections I can combine in other templates any way that I want. Yep.
So the parameters within the would that be relevant towards what page?
you mean like if you were to actually specify parameters inside of here?
Yeah.
For get footer, get header, they don't actually take any parameters. It always just looks for a file called header.php or a file called footer.php. In the case of get sidebar, because you can have multiple sidebars, so you can have a template file called sidebar 1, sidebar 2, sidebar 3, and in which case get sidebar will take a parameter which says which sidebar you want to include. Yeah. So that'll all be listed in the documentation for those functions there. So you can see here. So if I just look at get header, okay, it looks like you can maybe specify different headers as well. So yeah, but I'd say that's more common with the sidebar because your headers are probably going to be consistent across the different pages. But I guess you could have a header where in one version of the header you wanted a big one for like the front page and then a compressed version. So yeah, you could do something like that as well. Okay, so alright, I think we've got time to actually start outputting some WordPress post content. So if you remember from the default theme, it actually showed the Hello World post and a sample page. My theme doesn't show that because I'm not telling it to output any of the posts. You also notice that these images don't show up for the same reason that this one didn't. They're linked incorrectly, but I'm not going to worry about fixing that because I'm not actually going to use that bit of content. So the content from WordPress is not going to be hard-coded into the template files. It's going to come from the database. So all I'm going to do is keep this main content div here, and I'm going to delete everything inside it, because this is where we're going to write some PHP code to say go and get the posts and output them here. Okay, so if I refresh this, okay, you can see now that's empty. Okay, that's just my main content div with nothing in it. So this next bit, I guess, is a little bit more complex, but once you've got the code in there and it's working, you don't really need to touch it again. So we have something called the WordPress loop. Okay, so this is the documentation on the WordPress loop, and essentially the WordPress loop is a bit of PHP code, and in programming, in any programming language, a loop is a construct that it does the same bit of code a bunch of times. So this loop in this context is going to say do this code for as many times as you have posts to output. So we define the loop by defining the start of the loop and the end of the loop. And probably the easiest thing to do is just to copy one of these simpler examples. Let's go for... in fact, I'm just going to copy these bits of code here. So this bit is explaining that the loop essentially has a bit of PHP code to say that the loop starts here and another bit that says the loop ends here, and then we put other code in between that. So I'm going to copy this part of the code which says the loop starts here, and I'm going to paste that inside of my main content div, and then I'm also going to paste the ending part of the loop. Okay, so this looks a little complex, but essentially all this is doing is saying, okay, while there's still posts to output, then output the posts, and then this little bit at the end is saying if it doesn't have any posts, display a little message saying sorry, there's no post to display. So all we have to do is inside here know the bits of the WordPress function calls to output different parts of the post. Now I guess we should quickly look at what the posts look like in the administration section of WordPress. So if I click on posts up here, you can see there's the default post, hello world. Okay, and a post has various different things that describe it. It has a title, it has the content of the post, and then it has some information like what categories it's in, what tags it has, and all sorts of other stuff. So the simplest thing to do is just to output the title and the content of the post, and then any other stuff that you want to add, you can add that later as well. But I'm just going to demonstrate simply outputting these two main bits of information. Okay, so there is a WordPress function called title. Okay, I'll try and find the section where all of these live. Yeah, it's decided to break its CSS. Anyway. That's all right, I might find them later and post the specific links to those in the documentation later. But there's a function called the title, which will output the title of a post. Okay, and it essentially looks like this. You can give it various parameters, but you can also give it none, and it'll just output the title in plain text. So if all I want to do is output the title of the post, what I'm going to do is inside of the WordPress loop here, I'm going to say PHP the underscore title. Okay, and that will output the title of each of my posts. So this being a loop, I only have to write this once, and it will do it for however many posts that I actually have. So I'll upload that, refresh, okay, and there's the title of my post, hello world. Now, what I really want to do is put this title inside of a heading element, so I'm going to do that. Okay, there it is, and the next thing I'm going to do is output the content. So I'm going to wrap the content of this post in a div. And to output the content of a post, we use the underscore content. Okay, so now you can see there it is there. And again, if we inspect with Firebug, okay, it's not outputting any of that PHP code, it's outputting the result of that PHP code running. So there's the post title, there's my div, okay, and there's the content of the post, which is paragraph with a little bit of text. Now the other thing that I'm going to do, because commonly you're going to have more than one post output on a page, and so in order to be able to style those nicely, what I'm going to want to do is probably surround this entire post in its own div, and I'll give it a class of post. And if I want to give this div here, we'll call this class equals post content. Okay, so now this whole thing is contained in a class called post. So once I do have multiple posts in there, I can style each post individually. So I can do things like give them margin and padding and background colors and whatever else I want to. Okay, one more thing I'm going to do is, because the way that generally WordPress will work is it will list, you've got two ways of viewing posts. You can view a whole bunch of posts, but then you can also view a single post. So it's quite common to have the title of the post link to a page which views the single post by itself. So the way we can do that is you can output the link to any post by using a function called the _permalink. So what I can do is I'll wrap this title in some anchor tags, and for the href, okay, WordPress has a function called the _permalink, okay, which is clever enough to know that whichever post it's currently looking at in this loop is going to link to that post itself. Okay, upload that. Okay, and if we inspect this with Firebug, okay, you can see that the link that it's put here is my domain name, KIB216.if90.net / and then this question mark p = 1. So the way that WordPress knows what you want to look at is actually by deconstructing the URL. And so this p = 1 actually means get the post with the ID of 1. So all of your posts that you create in the database will be given an ID. Obviously this is the first one, so it's got an ID of 1. The next one I create will be 2, 3, 4, 5. And so I could view any of those individually by typing in that URL and saying p = and then the number of the post if I knew that. But it's much easier to output it like this and then just link it straight to it. So when I click on this now, okay, you can see the URL up here is changed to p = 1. And what this does is it doesn't really look any different, but it's showing that single one by itself. That'll become more evident if I go and add a second post. So let's go back to posts here, and I'm going to click on add new, and I'll call this my second post. Alright, and let's just give it a bunch of text. Okay, and you'll notice when you're creating posts in WordPress, it has certain ability to edit the code in a way that seems more familiar to someone who's not editing the HTML. So we can do things like bold and italicize and add links to things. Okay, and you'll notice these two tabs here. One is visual and one is HTML. So if we flick over to the HTML, you can see that it's automatically generated some of that for you. Okay, so the person ultimately, after the theme's all developed, who's publishing stories, for example, has some ability to format their content as well, but the way that that content sits within the overall template is determined by your theme files. Okay, so we'll publish this. Okay, you can see that this one's giving it a post ID of 5. Why it's not 2 is probably because the first post has a bunch of revisions, but it doesn't really matter. WordPress will keep track of that and just make sure that all of your individual posts have different ID numbers. So I'm going to publish that. Okay, and go back to the page here, and sorry, I need to go back to my home page. Okay, and you can see what it's doing, okay, in the classic scenario of a blog is it's outputting all of my posts in reverse chronological order, so the newest one's going to the top. And there are ways that we can change the order of how they output, and we'll go into those in later weeks. But you can see now why this is now much more powerful than having a static page, because anytime I want to add content to this now, I don't have to go in and edit the theme. I just create a new post and it will automatically output it. Okay, and again, it's got a link, so you can see I click this and it links just to that individual post. I click this one and it links just to that individual post. Okay, because you do also have the option of listing posts as excerpts, so you don't list the entire post, just a little bit of each one, so that you can briefly look at them all and then click on them and view the whole post. So that's again commonly what something like that is used for. So just very, very quickly, in the last couple of minutes that we have, I just want to say again why I did things like wrapping each post in its own div class. I did that because then I can go back and do things like I can edit my style.css. Okay, and I can say, well, any div that has a class of post, give it some padding, give it some margin, and give it a border. Okay, and now each of those posts gets that style. Okay, so, and again, we've only, because we've put it inside of this loop, we've only had to write this once, and it gets done for every single post that it's going to output. So you can see that becomes heaps more efficient. I could have, because you could output any number of posts that you want. You could output a single post, 10 posts, 100 posts. Doesn't matter if we've got it inside this loop, it will just do it for as many times as you want to output that post. Later on, we'll look at how you can just output the post in a particular category, and so this again will handle that. It will go, okay, I know you just want posts from a particular category, and I'll just output as many of those as there are. Okay, so that's probably a good point to leave it there. What we'll look at later on is doing the menu navigation stuff, and then also creating a widgetized sidebar. So you'll notice from, if we look at, if we even just take a look at my site here, which is using the default theme, all of this stuff in the sidebar here is not hard-coded into the template. These are things called widgets, which are type of plugins that you can download, and there's an admin interface where you can just drag and drop them in. So you might want to display a calendar, you can just drag and drop that in. In my case, I've got I've got categories, popular posts, tag cloud, things like that. Hundreds of widgets for probably anything that you can dream of. Okay, so I'll stop there. I think that's a good place to stop.